Welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Justice, and along with Jillian Levinson, I am the co-leader of Women to Women. And I am thrilled that Anika has returned today. For those of you who have not attended her sessions in the past, they are informative, they are accessible, they are relevant, and they are in our video library. So please feel free to go into our video library and take a look at past recordings because they're all really, really interesting topics. The last one she did was on the power of protein, and people were very receptive to that. And also, for those of you who are on our mailing list, we did a little piece on Anika in our most recent newsletter. And so there's some helpful information in there also. So please take a look at all of that. That's all. You can find all those links in our website. But today we're going to be talking about inflammation, and I get to be a guest and I get to be a learner and I get to just turn everything over to Anika, who will introduce herself, explain who she is and what she does, and then we'll get into the interesting topic. So thank you so much, and thank you. I know you put a lot of work into this presentation, and we are grateful and excited.
Thank you, Rachel, for the great introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. So today I'll be presenting on inflammation and diet. A little bit about myself. So right now I'm currently getting a master's in clinical nutrition. I'm halfway through, so not fully finished. This was a really interesting topic to research and learn about. I learned a lot and I'm excited to share with you all. Um, so I also want to say that I'm not a professional yet or an expert. So this is all stuff that I've learned while researching to prepare for this presentation. I just wanted to let you guys know that. So we're all on a learning journey about learning the relationship between inflammation and diet. Okay, so today we'll be covering what inflammation is, what the causes of inflammation are, how certain foods may increase or reduce inflammation, and practical dietary tips to support healing and wellness. So we're going to be starting off with the basics because some of us might need a review as well as myself on like what inflammation is, and then we'll go into the causes. There's so many, and while researching this, I learned about the external causes that sometimes are out of our control, as well as the ones that we can change through our diet and lifestyle. We'll also go into detail about the different foods that have like great health benefits to help us have a balance in our immune system and help reduce our inflammation. And then we'll also go into different diets and discuss specific foods that can really help our bodies manage inflammation and promote our own wellness. Okay, so now diving into what inflammation is. Inflammation is the body's natural defense mechanism. It's really how our immune system protects us when there's an injury, an infection, or even stress. And when this happens, our body releases immune cells and signaling molecules to repair this damage. So in the short term, it is really helpful. This is what helps us heal from cuts or different wounds and really helps us even recover from colds. There's two different types of inflammation. There is chronic and there's acute. And so chronic inflammation is long term, and we can think about it as an alarm system that stays on. And that alarm system is when our healthy tissues become affected. And there's also acute inflammation, which is really short term and helps our bodies just fight natural defenses on an everyday perspective. And so there are many things that can trigger inflammation. Some are outside our control, but many of them are linked to our diet and lifestyle. So for example, chronic stress, lack of sleep, smoking, excess alcohol, and even exposure to pollution can all contribute to inflammation. And then on the dietary side, foods that are high in refined sugars, processed meats, trans fats, saturated fats, those can also promote inflammation. And something as simple as a long-term lack of fruits, vegetables, or even fiber can also affect our immune system and our gut. And one interesting fact I learned while researching this was that 70% of our immune system like lives in our gut. So our gut microbiome is really important, and it's also really important for how we manage inflammation in our bodies. And before I move on, I also wanted to clarify like the trans fats and saturated fats on this slide because I know that sometimes there's so many different types of fats and it can be super confusing. So trans fats are the artificial fats created when liquid oils are hydrogenated. So when these oils are turned into solids, usually for shelf stability. And in the body, when we have these trans fats, these alter the structure of our cell membranes and they make them less functional and stiffer. And sometimes this can trigger our immune cells, especially macrophages, to release inflammatory cytokines to like fight these because they are not aware of them, and that can result in increase of systemic inflammation. Trans fats can also raise our LDL cholesterol and lower our HDL cholesterol, and that can sometimes put stress on our blood vessels and as a result promote inflammation in our artery walls. And on the other hand, saturated fats, these are the fats that are commonly found in foods like butter, red meat, cheese, and processed snacks. And when eaten in excess, they can also activate receptors on immune cells. And this leads to the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So high intake of saturated fats can lead to an increase in oxidative stress, which really means that more free radicals are produced. And we'll go over free radicals and antioxidants in the following slides, but they are also perpetrators for inflammation. And over time, like constant low grade activation really contributes to different types of like metabolic inflammation, amongst other types of like body inflammation. So you also might be wondering, how does inflammation become chronic? So it really becomes chronic when habits such as like poor sleep or smoking or consuming extra sugar and fat become persistent and regular because that's ultimately keeping our inflammation turned on. And other factors such as gut bacterial imbalances, environmental toxins such as pollution, or even untreated infections can also keep the immune system on alert. And sometimes when it's on alert, it's sending out all these pro-inflammatory signals. And so we can think of it as a fire alarm that like won't stop ringing. And that's just like pointing out that the noise itself becomes the problem. And so the good news is that chronic inflammation can be calmed down, and we can think of this as like helping our body find its reset button. And so there's different ways that we'll talk about in this presentation through like diet, such as like food, but also through lifestyle factors such as through movement, stress, sleep, and even hydration that we'll also touch upon that can really help us manage our inflammation as well as finding a balance. I also wanted to touch on cancer and inflammation, which have a relationship and can actually feed into each other. So, when cancer cells grow, they release tiny chemical messengers called inflammatory molecules that help them survive and spread. And so, one way they do this is by creating new blood vessels to feed. And this process is called angiogenesis. So, in this way, inflammation can actually help cells grow and even invade nearby tissues. And when it comes to treatment, such as chemotherapy or radiation, these are essential tools, but they can temporarily increase inflammation as the body's repairing these damaged cells. And so that's why people may experience the fatigue, the swelling, or body aches during and after treatment, because inflammation is just part of that healing response. And so that's why I think it's really important just to be like more mindful and conscientious about nutrition and hydration because they can really act as great solutions to help our body rebalance that inflammation and even like calm that down. There's so many different ways, and we'll talk about the foods. We'll talk about hydration too. That also supports the immune system and helps us flush out these inflammatory byproducts created during treatment. Okay, so now we're moving into the diet aspect of inflammation. So there are a lot of different foods that can signal or even just like send mixed signals to the immune system. And these foods can trigger the release of inflammatory chemicals, like I've said, cytokines that make the body feel like it's under attack, even when it's not. So I have an outline of the general types like processed, fried, sugary, refined foods. And on my next slide, we'll go over the specific foods. So here we have foods that can increase inflammation. So these processed or fried foods, they really contain unhealthy fats that send mixed signals, and they can sometimes, as well as like these sugary foods and refined carbs, cause sometimes like a quick spike in blood sugar. And the sudden rise and fall puts stress on the body and increases something called oxidative stress that we'll also go over. And that's when there are too many free radicals that build up and start damaging our cells. And over time, these foods can really irritate our tissues and keep inflammation active in the background, even if we don't feel it right away. And so, on the other hand, we have foods that help reduce inflammation. And these are going to be whole plant based foods that work in the opposite way. And so, we'll touch upon why they work in the opposite way, but these are really foods that are going to help support our immune system and that do not contain the like saturated fats, trans fats that we discussed, as well as the artificial sugars that really just make our immune system stay on alert, even in the background. So now you might be wondering, what do these healthy foods have that helps them fight inflammation? And these foods have antioxidants. So this is one of the graphics I found that I thought was super helpful that explains antioxidants and free radicals because sometimes this can be a complex topic to understand. But basically, free radicals are molecules that have an unpaired electron, and they can even be floating around like from pollution in our like environment, or like just they're super common and potent in the cities. And so this unpaired electron is not favorable, and it can actually cause damage sometimes. And an antioxidant is basically a molecule filled with extra electrons. And the powerful thing about antioxidants is that they can donate an electron to a free radical and ultimately neutralize it. So they're really helping our bodies. And foods that are like such as like berries or like leafy greens, citrus fruits, and even green tea, like these are really potent in antioxidants, and these are great for counteracting the damage and supporting cellular repair. One food that I found that has like a lot of antioxidant potency is blueberries. And so I actually eat blueberries. I try to have them at least a couple times, a few times a week. And from past research, I've learned that sometimes it's better to purchase frozen blueberries rather than just like fresh store-bought ones, because when these blueberries are frozen, they're immediately like flash freezed after being picked. And so when they're flash freezed, they are retaining so much of their nutrients, whereas like the blueberries that are just picked, like they lose their nutrients like over time. And so sometimes like purchasing frozen blueberries can be more beneficial for our bodies, and even usually price differences, they're better than purchasing just store-bought blueberries. And green tea also has a high potency of antioxidants. It has little caffeine, so that's also a great way to get in your antioxidants in the morning, especially now that it's cold, and like starting your day off with a warm tea would be great. Okay, so now that we've talked about antioxidants, I wanted to talk about the different types of anti-inflammatory diets. So These are some of the anti-inflammatory diets I came across in my research that really prioritize foods that are potent in antioxidants, as well as whole foods that have unsaturated fats, such as like olive oil, that is really good for our bodies. And we'll go over olive oil in the following slides. So on the left, we have the Mediterranean diet. This one is a diet that focuses on fruits, vegetables, whole grains, fish, olive oil, and nuts. It's super rich in antioxidants and healthy fats, and it really aims to protect our cells and support heart health. I will go over it more in depth, but research has shown that it's one of the most effective long-term eating patterns for reducing inflammation and for improving energy and recovery. Next, we have the DASH diet, which stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And although this diet was originally designed to help lower blood pressure, it's also very anti-inflammatory because it's really built around the idea of nourishing our bodies with whole foods. Um, this diet also incorporates low-fat dairy. It limits added sugars, saturated fats, salt, all of which can trigger inflammation. The next one we have is the whole foods plant diet. And this one takes it a step further by focusing mainly on the plant sources of nutrition, such as beans, lentils, nuts, and colorful produce, and really minimizing or even removing animal products. So this kind of diet is really beneficial for our gut health and maintaining like steady energy and also steady blood sugar levels because when we're eating a variety of plant-based foods and like a variety of vegetables, we're feeding our gut so many different types of healthy bacteria that we might not get if we're not focusing on like diversifying our diet with so many plants. Finally, some people follow the ketogenic diet, which is healthy, which is high in healthy fats and moderate in protein, and also prioritizes a low carbohydrate intake. And so, for certain people, this diet is actually a great approach to regulating inflammation and supporting our metabolic balance. Um, so this one was very interesting to research. There, I didn't find as many studies on the ketogenic diet for anti-inflammatory effects as I did for like the whole foods plant-based or the Mediterranean diet. Um, and like speaking about these diets, I also want to say that there's no perfect one diet. It's really all about finding like the best eating patterns that are sustainable and supportive for your own individual body, your own individual preferences and needs. And so that's why I wanted to just give an overview of the four diets that I found while researching the role of inflammation in these diets. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the Mediterranean diet because I actually found a lot of different studies that looked into how the Mediterranean diet really aims to reduce inflammation. So, it's one of the most best studied eating patterns, and what makes it so special is that it's really oriented around being a lifestyle pattern that just emphasizes fresh, whole, and flavorful foods. It also prioritizes antioxidants, omega-3s, and fibers, and I think what really sets it apart is actually the omega-3s and the healthy fats. And these all like calm inflammation in our body, and so a lot of the nutrients from the Mediterranean diet comes from olive oil, fish, nuts, seeds, as well as vegetables and fruits. And it's really important to focus on the healthy fats in the Mediterranean diet because these are really what protects our cells and supports our heart health. And they work at a cellular level by really strengthening our cell membranes and even reducing the inflammatory signals that can damage our tissues. I also found that there's a lot of research that points that the Mediterranean lifestyle slash diet is one of the most balanced and sustainable because it doesn't require any like extreme changes like other diets do. And it really encourages just a more natural take and approach to nourishing ourselves. And so now we'll go over this chart that I found. This chart may seem slightly complex, but we'll break it down. So this chart is actually from the first study at the top. Um, And let's see. Okay, so this green row, these are all of the different types of like components that the Mediterranean diet like prioritizes, being like polyphenols, which are natural compounds found in colorful fruits and veggies, olive oil, and tea. They act as antioxidants, and they really help, as we said, neutralize the free radicals, lower oxidative stress, and ultimately help us with the damage to our cells from the free radicals. Lycopene is a plant pigment found in tomatoes and other red fruits. It helps reduce oxidative damage as well and inflammation, especially in the heart and blood vessels. Next, we have trace elements and minerals, as well as vitamins that are like selenium, magnesium, zinc. And then we have omega-3 fatty acids that really come from the fish and nuts that the Mediterranean diet prioritizes, and these really help balance our immune system by reducing the inflammatory molecules in our body. And so, next, if we follow these arrows down, we'll see like Th1, Th2, Th17, and B lymphocytes. So, these are all white blood cells that help defend our body, and um, these are like they're the nutrients in the Mediterranean diet influence our immune cells, and they really help our immune cells, such as these, which defend our body. And we'll also see the epigenetic mechanisms and modulation of genetic gene expression. So that really helps us with certain genes that are turned on and off when inflammation occurs. Um, and then there's also different types of um, cell adhesion, complement activity, as well as autophagy regulation, which also helps bring down and balance our own inflammation. And we also, so autophagy regulation is basically cellular cleanup. Reducing oxidative stress is another word for like the cellular damage from free radicals that gets helped. And reducing cellular adhesion is also important because that is basically saying that there's less stickiness of immune cells to blood vessel walls. And decreasing complement activity is also great because that can promote, that can help us alleviate overactive inflammation. And at the bottom section, we have pro-inflammatory cytokines or chemical messengers that really drive chronic inflammation. And so these are the molecules, um, like, and this for cytokines that are released when inflammation occurs. And so the Mediterranean diet really helps quiet those signals, ultimately lowering our body's inflammation. So as you can see, there's like so many different types of cellular mechanisms and cellular actions that are ongoing in our body all the time. And there's so many components of the Mediterranean diet that really supports the health of these ongoing like background types of cellular activity. Okay, now that we've talked about the healthy fats and omega-3s, I wanted to really focus on this and like distinguish the omega-3s from the healthy fats. And so um, one of the biggest reasons why the Mediterranean diet is so effective is really because of these omega-3 fatty acids. And so when our body experiences an injury or an infection, the immune system sends out signals to create inflammation. And as we discussed, that's kind of like turning on a fire alarm. And that's actually a good thing in the short term because it helps protect and heal us. But once the body starts to recover, that inflammation needs to be quieted down. And that's why omega-3s are really important because that's where they come in. Omega-3s are helping our body turn off the inflammation when it's no longer needed. And that's basically like switching off the alarm once the fire is out. And so they do this by making special compounds called resolvins and protectins, and these are basically like messengers that tell our immune system, like, okay, the healing process is complete, time to stand down. And it really helps prevent our immune system from overreacting and also from damaging healthy tissues, which is very key and central. And that's something that happens when inflammation becomes chronic. And then I also incorporated some foods that are high in omega-3s, such as salmon, sardines, walnuts, chia seeds, and flax seeds, which are all staples in the Mediterranean diet and play a huge role in protecting our heart and brain health, as well as obviously lowering inflammation and supporting recovery to after illness and treatment. So, one food that I wanted to point out real quick was our walnuts. Walnuts are really great in terms of the omega-3 content they have, and they're so easy to add to different salads. I actually love to start my day off with a handful of walnuts just because their effects and benefits for brain health are super great, and it's also proven through like different research studies that we could look at further. Okay, now going into olive oil. So now that we've talked about omega-3s, I wanted to also talk about olive oil, which is a huge staple in the Mediterranean diet. It's really at the heart of it. And so so olive oil and omega-3s are both anti-inflammatory, but they work in slightly different ways. So as we said, omega-3s, which come from like fatty fish, walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, and polyunsaturated fats, they really help our body make the resolvins and protectins to turn off inflammation once healing is done. And so olive oil, on the other hand, is made mostly of monosaturated fats, especially one called oleic acid. And these fats are really important because they help lower our bad cholesterol and they help keep blood vessels flexible. And so, what makes olive oil special is that it has a lot of polyphenols, which we saw at the chart, which we learned about, and these are the natural compounds that act as antioxidants. So they're kind of like our body's cleanup crew. They really protect our cells from damage caused by stress, caused by pollution, or even inflammation before it starts. So it's really protective in a restorative way too, that also shields our body and our cells. Um, some of these studies also pointed out that research has shown that people who regularly use olive oil tend to have lower levels of inflammatory markers, healthier blood vessels, and a reduced risk of heart disease, diabetes, and other autoimmune conditions. Some studies have also found that olive oil can really help improve our gut microbiome, which helps our healthy bacteria thrive and reduces inflammation. Um, I think one of the greatest tips is just swapping out olive oil instead of using butter, just because it has so many great potent health benefits. And we learned that butter has saturated fats that sometimes, when consumed in excess, may not be as helpful or good for ourselves. And so now that we've talked about olive oil, I wanted to have a slide that really helps us choose an olive oil, because when you go to the store, there's just so many bottles of olive oil with extra virgin, not virgin, like so many different types of labels, and it can be kind of confusing. So I would recommend, well, this is also based off of some of the studies I found, to look for extra virgin on the label. And so extra virgin means that the oil is minimally processed, it's cold pressed, and it's really great for keeping the natural antioxidants. It's also one of the most flavorful types of olive oil, and when you taste the bitterness or sometimes a little like peppery aftertaste, that's actually the polyphenols that you're tasting, which is kind of cool. It's also super important to check for the best buy date, as well as to check for the bottle it comes in. There are some olive oil bottles that don't come in dark glass bottles, and I would say that the ones that do come in dark glass bottles are great because they're protecting the oil from light and heat, and that can destroy nutrients. Um, so that's a really big key visual thing to look out for, as well as the origin. Also just being aware about like the taste, um, just to see how fresh it is, and storing it away from the sunlight is also really important because the sun, as we said, can destroy some of the nutrients. This is one of the charts I found on the Cleveland Clinic website, and this information is from Hartford Healthcare. So I wanted to outline, like, now that we're talking about the Mediterranean diet, I wanted to outline the guidelines a little bit more clearly slash visually. And so breaking down this chart, I think this is one of the best charts I found online that provides the best visual summary. So at the top, we see the foundation of the Mediterranean diet, which is like the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, the extra virgin olive oil. These are foods that the Mediterranean diet encourages people include at every meal because they're rich in the antioxidants, the fiber, and the healthy fats. And next, you'll see the section for fish and seafood. They recommend ideally like 2 or 3 servings or more per week, including foods like salmon, sardines, mackerel, and tuna, which all are super potent in omega 3s and help turn off inflammation in our body once healing is done. Next we have like the poultry, like the eggs, beans, and dairies. These are encouraged, but also it's important to enjoy these like regularly, but just in moderation sometimes. They're great sources of protein, vitamins, and minerals, which are all important to supporting our muscle strength and recovery. Yep. There's also a section for like the red and the processed meats, which are foods to just like think about and just like be more conscientious about like when consuming, just because like they tend to contain saturated fats that can promote inflammation, as we talked about, when eaten too often. The same goes for sweets or like foods high in added sugar. They're not off limits or anything, but it's just important to like just be more mindful of consuming them and like what is like in them. Um, okay. I One of the articles I found pointed at or highlighted 9 foods to eat in the Mediterranean diet, and I thought this was really helpful because the Mediterranean diet, it's so flexible and it's such a lifestyle approach that sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to like know exactly like some ideas for recipes and like foods. And so I have highlighted 9. The first one is olive oil, which we've discussed. The next one is chickpeas. I love to make homemade hummus and include chickpeas and olive oil, and sometimes I'll include like a cauliflower for like fiber, because it adds no taste, it just adds like texture. Salmon, which we've discussed, which is amazing because it has so many omega 3s, supports our heart and brain health. Um, the next foods are yogurt, cheese, and grapes. So yogurt is so great because yogurt contains not only probiotics, but it also contains prebiotics. So we're feeding our gut bacteria in like 2 different ways. It is also important to be mindful about the type of yogurt you're purchasing because there's so many options like those Chobani yogurts with fruit at the bottom, and although they do taste really good, sometimes those fruits have a lot of added sugar and can raise like blood pressure spikes. So I usually purchase like the plain Greek yogurt, and I do crave something sweet on top of it, so I always use honey, which is my favorite sweetener alternative. Um, I also included cheese and grapes. Cheese because it has so many calcium and protein, and grapes of its because it's packed with antioxidants like resveratrol. One of my favorite ways to enjoy grapes is actually by freezing them because it's a nice, refreshing, cool snack. Um, and the next foods are nuts, quinoa, and fresh herbs. We touched on nuts such as walnuts and how they have a lot of healthy fats. Quinoa is a really great source of plant protein, and I am pretty sure quinoa is one of the only grains that contains all 8 essential amino acids, but I'll have to look into that. So it has a lot of great health benefits. It's super easy to make like once and just continue to eat throughout the week. It's a great meal prep type of food. And fresh herbs are also one of the foods that the Mediterranean diet highlights. And some of you may have attended one of my past presentations on spices and the antioxidants in spices. And so, spices are actually, as well as fresh herbs, a really good way to add antioxidants into your meals, and they'll add a little flavor, a little kick. Personally, I use a lot of oregano because oregano is really potent in its antioxidants and health benefits, as well as parsley. They're super easy to use. Okay, so now I wanted to touch on the power of color because we've talked about like the benefits of fruits and vegetables, and I wanted to kind of like explain that like why color is so important. So one of the simplest ways to make your plate more anti-inflammatory is to literally like eat the rainbow. And that's kind of like a fun type of approach when you're making a salad because each color in fruits and vegetables represents different nutrients and antioxidants that help our bodies in so many different ways. And so I highlighted lycopene, which we talked about in the chart of the Mediterranean diet. There's also grapes and actually on this slide. This is a great chart I found with all the different phytochemicals, the plant sources, and the possible benefits. This was from one of the research studies I came across, and I thought it was super helpful. So I wanted to share that with you all. We also talked about briefly the role of gut health in inflammation. And so this was actually super interesting to me because your gut lining and the different layers are super important when it comes to inflammation because your gut lining, like specifically the mucosal layer, it is a barrier that prevents harmful substances from entering the bloodstream. And so by having a healthier gut and a healthier layer, you're basically helping to calm your immune system because your gut barrier is almost a gatekeeper and it really helps to keep out the harmful microbes and really support our immune balance. And so this was an interesting graphic I found. So this graphic is showing us the mucosal layer in a healthy gut. Eubiosis is healthy gut, dysbiosis is not a healthy gut, and then there's also leaky gut syndrome. And so as you can see, like this mucosal layer is so thick and it has like a great barrier and is preventing different types of like external invaders from entering it. And so it's maintaining everything at the bottom and it's protecting our bodies. This type of gut has some protection, but there's still invaders that are coming through, and leaky gut is when there's very bare minimum types of protection. And so these types of factors such as like high fatty diet or stress or like excess alcohol or like stuff from our environment, these are all examples of like the types of like invaders that affect our gut barrier. And so now you might be wondering like how do we maintain a healthy mucus layer? So that's where hydration comes in. So hydration is also really important for maintaining our mucus layer in our gut, as well as playing a role in like flushing out our metabolic waste. So that ties in like the kidneys and the liver. And so when we're dehydrated, these inflammatory molecules such as uric acid can accumulate. And that's why it's important to really like stay hydrated and just to like have a healthy gut layer because a lot of it depends like a lot of our gut lining depends on how healthy our mucosal layer is because that is what determines what and which harmful molecules enter the bloodstream and trigger inflammation. And as we just said, the kidneys are also super important as well as the liver because they're really helping our bodies remove the waste, regulate our water balance, and remove the toxins that are like coming into our bodies. So hydration connects to our gut microbiome, our kidneys, our liver, our diet. It's super important for just maintaining equilibrium in our body. This is actually a graphic I incorporated in one of my past presentations on the role of hydration. I found this to be super helpful because it's showing the percentage of water in certain food items. I thought this was super interesting just because like food is also another way that we can stay hydrated. Like people always like it's very easy to assume that water is the only way, but it's actually also food that gives us a lot of hydration and water. This was also some information I presented during my last presentation on hydration. I thought it was so helpful and I wanted to incorporate it again because this slide is just really going over other types of beverages aside from water that are not only rich in antioxidants, but also support our inflammation, our hydration needs, and also our digestion. So now that we've talked about diet, I want to just touch on the lifestyle habits that also affect inflammation, such as movement, rest and sleep, and stress management. Movement is so important, such as like even just walking or doing anything to improve our circulation really helps our immune balance. And gentle exercise is so impactful. It does not have to be anything like rigorous or hard cardio. And rest and sleep is also very important because this is another way our body and our immune system works when we're just sleeping because our body's clearing out our damaged cells. And that also relates to stress because poor sleep raises cortisol, which is a stress hormone that can raise inflammation. And sometimes when we're not conscientious about how we're managing our stress, that can raise our cortisol and that can ultimately make our immune system switched on and keep our body in a fight or flight response, sometimes in the background when we're not even fully aware that we're stressed. This is a sample anti-inflammatory diet because we talked about like a chart, we talked about specific foods. So I wanted to just give one type of diet that has one type of day. So this has like the antioxidants and the blueberries for breakfast. It has like proteins as well as healthy fats for lunch. Snacks, green tea is a really easy little like caffeine boost type of snack that has antioxidants in it. We talked about omega-3s and salmon, which is also so great for you as an easy dinner option. And this is just one of the ways that we can have a balanced day that can ultimately support our long-term wellness and reduce inflammation. So, we've gone over a lot of information today, and I wanted to have one slide with key takeaways. I wanted to just like really clarify that inflammation's not bad. It's natural and it's just part of our own healing process with our acute and chronic inflammation. And I think the biggest thing to remember is just to like try to find balance in our lives. And so I think that the Mediterranean diet provides a great flexibility, great structure, great balance to like understanding our body and the foods that can reduce our inflammation and help us with our long-term wellness. Um, it's also so important to stay hydrated, to move our body. Even a simple walk is just great because it promotes circulation. And as we've talked about a lot of these like specific foods and the specific phytochemicals and antioxidants in them, it's great because being more conscientious about these types of foods can help us make like small, consistent changes that can result in a bigger long-term difference in our health, in our inflammation, and in our long-term wellness. So that's the end. Thank you guys so much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you all for joining us for this past hour, and most importantly, huge thank you to Anika. Have a great afternoon, everyone.